This is Algebra 2, Lesson 1-3. The topic is properties of real numbers. We have two objectives for this lesson: to be able to evaluate algebraic expressions and to simplify algebraic expressions. So let's dive into the beginning of the notes. It says writing an algebraic expression. You've probably written some word problems over the years, or had to take a word problem and write an equation or a formula from it. And so there's certain vocabulary words we come to associate with different math properties. Or different math operations. So addition, some of the words we know that go with addition are add. So we can add to our list. Some other words that we might associate with it are sum, plus, together, combine, more. What I'd like you to do is pause the video and see if you can how many you can come up with subtraction, multiplication, and division. I'm only going to put a few up there. If you come up with some that I don't have, share them with me when you are back in class. So you can see some of the basic ones that I came up with up there. Double check your list. If I have some that you don't, add them, and if you have some that I don't, circle them. Share those with me when you're back. So the next part is we're going to actually write algebraic expressions for each one of these problems. The first one says, write an algebraic expression for each word phrase, 2 times the sum of A and B. Now make sure when you're writing an algebraic expression that you are checking the units that are being used in the problem, if there are units being used in the problem, the operations that they're asking for the problem and the order that they're asking you to do these things in. It's saying 2 times, so you know you're going to go 2 times something, and it's times the sum of A and B, which means that A and B must be grouped together because it's 2 times the entire sum of it. I have my times and I have my sum, 2 operations in there. Now you could write it as 2 times A plus B, but it looks like 2x times quantity A plus B, so you might want to write it 2 times A plus B. That's going to be a little bit easier. That way you don't think that that multiplies an x. So what I'd like you to do is see if you can do the next 2 on your own, problems 2 and 3. Pause the video, try them, and then check your work with mine. Number 2, you should have 5 times the 5 and then set a parentheses and minus 3 in there. Number 3, I'm guessing a few of you at least have the same thing I have written up there. I'm going to tell you that that is not correct. Because in this particular example, you have to pay attention to the units. They're saying you spend 6 hours sleeping plus an extra 7 minutes. You need to get both those 6 hours and 7 minutes to be in the same unit. Because minutes is smaller, I would take the 6 hours and convert it into minutes. There's 60 minutes an hour, so in 6 hours there's 360 minutes. So you want to write your equation with 360. So we know that this is actually wrong. So you're going to sleep 360 minutes plus 7 minutes for each time that you hit the snooze button. There's 360 plus 7n. Now, this next question says, what does n represent in the previous equation or previous question? That's always something they should be paying attention to. They even define it for you in the previous question. So if they do define it, make sure you're reading that carefully. If they don't, see if you can figure out what it is. But n is actually going to be, n should end up being the number of times you hit the snooze button, because that's the part of your problem that is changing each night. All right, so evaluating expressions, you've seen this for years, PEMDAS. PEMDAS starts for, first we do parentheses, and then we evaluate exponents. So something like 3 squared. Then we multiply two numbers, we divide, we add, and we subtract. Make sure when you are evaluating expression, you're doing in that order. Now, really, when we write this, M and D, multiply and divide, are the same step. You're going to do whichever one comes first. Add and subtract are the same thing. You're going to do whichever one comes first. Multiply does not have priority over divide, and add does not have priority over subtract. They are in the same step. You do whichever one of those comes first. So let's start by evaluating some expressions. It says evaluate the expression for the given value. Make sure when you plug something into an expression, you know x is equal to -2, so you're going to put that in for x. The thing you have to be very careful about is that if you have a negative number, you have to put that in parentheses when you plug it in. So you're going to put -2 in for x and then square it. The reason being that if you type this whole thing into your calculator and you did not have -2 in the parentheses, this would not be correct because you would still have a negative number left. If you just went 10 minus 3 times -2 squared, when you square, you're only squaring the 2 then and not the negative. And so this is not going to get you the same thing. So now we can evaluate this. We're going to start with parentheses. So here's my set of parentheses. There's no operation to do in there, so next I'm going to move the exponent, so -2 squared. That's -2 times -2, which is 4, so I get 10 minus 3 times 4. Now I multiply or divide. I see a multiplication sign, so I'm going to go 3 times 4. And now I see a subtraction sign, and so I am going to subtract. And I end up with -2. You can always always be careful as you're doing problems like this. I want you guys to do the next one on your own. Pause the video, do it on your own, and then check your work with mine. You can see all my work as I solve this. I started off by evaluating these parentheses, and I also did this exponent over here because those ones did not affect the other outcome. I combined some steps together in there, so if you are stuck or you got something different, pause the video, check your work with mine, make sure you did everything in the right order. We're going to move on to some properties for simplifying algebraic expressions. So the first one is that we actually do have to define subtraction. The definition of subtraction is that a minus b is the same as a plus a negative b, and we use that in algebra a lot to interchange stuff. Definition of division says that a divided by b is the same as a over b as a fraction, or it's the same as a times 1 over b. The one key is that b can never be 0. You can't divide by 0. Distributive property for subtraction says that a times the quantity b minus c is equal to ab minus ac. Multiplication by 0 says that any number times 0 is 0. The multiplication by a -1 says that -1 times a is going to give you negative a. Opposite of a sum says that the opposite, which is what that negative is, of a plus b equals negative a plus negative b, or negative a minus b. Opposite of a difference, the negative of the quantity a minus b equals negative a plus b, or b minus a. Opposite of a product, negative quantity ab equals negative a times b, or equals a times negative b. You're going to associate that negative with either. Opposite of an opposite, so the opposite of negative a is actually just going to be a. All right, let's use some of these properties. So another thing we talk about is combining like terms. You've done this many times, combining like terms. Like terms have the exact same variables to the exact same powers. So if you're struggling with this, I use shapes. I start by looking at a variable, and the very first one is an x. This is an x squared, so I'm going to give that a circle. Anything else that just has an x squared, I'm also going to give it a circle. I see that in this last term, -4x squared, and I'm going to associate that negative out in front with it. So those are the only two that are like the x squared, so I can combine them. You take their coefficients and you perform the operation that occurs. So 7 minus 4, you get 3x squared. We're going to do the exact same thing now. We have a y squared, so I'm going to box that one in. I'm looking for another y squared. I see it there. It's only a y squared, so I can combine those. Notice how I have those signs included in front, so it's positive 3y squared plus 2y squared. Combine those coefficients, 3 and 2, and you get plus 5y squared. Pretty straightforward. This is not a new concept for you. Here are several problems I'd like you to do on your own. Make sure that you're performing any operations that you need to perform before you can combine like terms. So pause the video now, and when you're done, check your work with mine. For the first one, I got 5x minus 4x squared plus 5y squared. For B, I got negative k minus 11m. And for C, I got 5x squared minus 10x. Now notice in A, we have a 5x and we have a 4x squared. X and x squared are not the same thing. You cannot combine those. Same goes for C, 5x squared, 10x squared, negative 10x squared. X squared and x are not the same thing. You cannot combine them. So those are both in simplest form. The last thing we need to do for combining like terms are what do you do if there are fractions? And this year you will be dealing with a lot of fractions to add some rigor to our problems. Remember, you always want to find common denominators. So you look at the denominators, you have 2, 4, and 8. You want to think about multiples that 2, 4, and 8 all have in common. Luckily for us, 4 goes into 8 and 2 goes into 8. So we want to multiply both of those the two first fractions by a number that would get us a denominator of 8. Now make sure when you multiply, you're actually multiplying by 1 because that means you're not actually changing things. So what you want, you're not changing any values. What you want to do is figure out how to get 2 to be 8. Well, you multiply by 4, so if I can multiply the bottom, I also have to multiply the top. That's that multiplying by 1 that keeps it balanced. We're going to do the same thing with x over 4. 4 times 2 gives us 8. And then we just have minus 2x over 8. So now do your multiplications. 20x plus 2x minus 2x. Now what I do, since I know that all these denominators are 8, I just put everything over the same thing. It's all over 8. Now I combine my next terms, 20x plus 2x minus 2x. That gives me 20x over 8. The last step is that you want to get that fraction in simplest form. So you look at 20 and 8. I can factor a 4 out of both of those. 20 divided by 4 gives me 5, and 8 divided by 4 gives me 2. That is my final answer. This video was a little bit longer today. Sorry about that, but this was the end of lesson 1-3 of Algebra 2. Our topic today, we'll be able to evaluate algebraic expressions and to simplify algebraic expressions.